There are stories that are called love stories simply because one person insists that they are. But love requires two people. Obsession does not. In 1930, a young woman named Maria Elena Milagro de Hoyos entered a hospital in Key West, Florida, suffering from tuberculosis. There, she met a German-born X-ray technician named Carl Tanzler, a man more than 30 years older than she was. A man who called himself Count Karl von Kossel, and a man who would later claim that fate had brought her to him. Elena would die the following year. Carl Tanzler would refuse to leave her buried, and for 7 years, he would keep what remained of her inside his home. This is not a story about a romance that conquered death. It is a story about a man who confused possession with devotion, and a woman who was denied peace long after her life had ended. This is Darker Things. Carl Tanzler was born in Dresden, Germany, in 1877. Even the basic story of his early life is difficult to separate from the mythology he created around himself. He presented himself as a physician, inventor, engineer, aristocrat, and man of almost supernatural destiny. In reality, he worked as an X-ray technician at the United States Marine Hospital in Key West. He preferred the grander name Count Karl von Kossel, although there is no reliable evidence that he possessed a noble title. According to Tanzler's later accounts, he had experienced visions as a child. In them, a deceased female ancestor supposedly revealed the face of the woman he was destined to love. A beautiful dark-haired stranger. Whether Tanzler truly believed this, or later invented the story to make his obsession seem inevitable, is impossible to know. What is known is that on April 22, 1930, Maria Elena Milagro de Hoyos came to the Marine Hospital for tests. Elena was 20 years old. She was a Cuban-American woman from Key West, whose life had already been marked by hardship. Her marriage had fallen apart. Tuberculosis had spread through her family, and she was gravely ill. She was 22 years old. For most people, her death would have ended the relationship, real or imagined. For Tanzler, it began something far darker. He paid for an elaborate above-ground mausoleum in the Key West cemetery. Elena's family permitted the arrangement, apparently believing Tanzler to be a grieving friend who had tried to help her. He was given access to the tomb. Night after night, Tanzler visited Elena's resting place. He brought flowers and spoke to her. He later claimed that Elena's spirit called to him from inside the tomb and asked to be removed. Whether he heard a voice, imagined one, or created an excuse no longer matters. In 1933, nearly 2 years after Elena's death, Carl Tanzler entered the mausoleum and removed her body. He carried her remains to a place where he could work in secret. Elena's body had badly deteriorated. Tanzler attempted to reconstruct it. He connected bones with wire. He filled empty areas with cloth and rags. He rebuilt the shape of her face with wax plaster and silk, and placed glass eyes into the skull. He fashioned a wig from hair that had reportedly been saved by Elena's mother. He dressed the remains in clothing, jewelry, stockings, gloves, and a bridal veil. Perfume disinfectants and preserving chemicals were used to conceal the effects of decomposition. This was not the restoration of a human life. It was the construction of a human-sized object around what remained of Elena's body. Tanzler placed her in a bed inside his home, and there she remained for 7 years. Neighbors saw him buying women's clothing and perfume. Rumors spread through Key West. Some believed he had secretly married. Others suspected that the figure inside his home was not alive. Tanzler continued to behave as though Elena were his companion. He spoke to her, dressed her, and surrounded her with music and objects of domestic life. In his private reality, Elena could no longer reject him, leave him, or contradict the story he had created. That is one of the most frightening parts of this case. Tanzler's so-called love required Elena to have no voice. In life there is no proof that she chose him. In death, he made choice impossible. By 1940, the rumors had reached Elena's family. Her sister, Florinda, went to Tanzler's home and demanded answers. Inside, she found the reconstructed remains of her sister. Authorities were called. Tanzler was arrested, and investigators entered a room containing strange machinery, a homemade organ, and the bed where Elena's remains had been kept. The discovery became a national sensation. Newspapers portrayed Tanzler as a bizarre romantic, a lonely eccentric whose love had become stronger than death. Some members of the public even sympathized with him. That framing is still repeated today, but it leaves Elena almost completely out of her own story. After being removed from Tanzler's house, her body was examined and placed on public display at a Key West funeral home. Thousands of people came to view her remains. Even after Tanzler was stopped, Elena was denied dignity. First, she had been treated as an object of obsession. Then she became an object of public curiosity. Tanzler was declared legally sane enough to face proceedings and accused of disturbing the tomb and removing the body without authorization. But he was never punished. The statute of limitations had expired. The case was dropped, and Tanzler was released. Elena's remains were finally reburied in a secret, unmarked location so that Tanzler, or anyone else, could not disturb them again. Tanzler eventually left Key West. In 1947, he published his version of the story under the title The Secret of Elena's Tomb. He presented himself not as a grave robber, but as a man carrying out a mission of love, science, and spiritual destiny. He never appeared to understand the central horror of his actions. He had not preserved a relationship, he had erased the other person from it. In his later years, Tanzler created a life-sized effigy of Elena and kept it near him. He died in Florida in 1952, still attached to the fantasy he had constructed more than 2 decades earlier. Stories about Carl Tanzler are often packaged with phrases like undying love, devotion beyond the grave, or the man who loved too much. But love respects the existence of another person. Love recognizes boundaries. Love does not require silence, helplessness, or death. Carl Tanzler did not defeat death. He simply refused to accept that Elena's body and Elena's story did not belong to him. And perhaps that is why this case remains so disturbing. The mausoleum, the wax face, and the glass eyes are grotesque, but beneath them is something more recognizable. The belief that wanting someone badly enough creates a right to possess them, and that obsession becomes noble when it is described as love. Maria Elena de Hoyos lived for only 22 years. 4 generations afterward, her name has been attached to the man who violated her grave. But she was not Carl Tanzler's corpse bride. She was not the fulfillment of his prophecy. She was a young woman whose illness made her vulnerable, whose death made her defenseless, and whose remains were taken by a man who believed his desires mattered more than her dignity. Carl Tanzler wanted the world to remember a love that survived death. What the world should remember instead is the cost of an obsession that refused to let the dead rest. And that is one of the darker things